Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me, spending part of your Friday with me. I'm Greg Swartz. I'm the big man half of the big man Dram. This is the Dram, which we'll talk about in a moment. We'll talk a lot about in a moment. This is my second to last one of these of the year, and we're doing a 1-2 punch on Isla for these last two today. Emma McHarrie from Kilchoman Distillery, and next week David Brody from Bunnahabhain, and that's going to round out the year. But we're already actually working on a bunch of new ones for the new year as well. So stick with us. But enough about me. Let's welcome Emma.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining me.
Anytime. Lovely way to spend my Friday night.
Is it really? I mean, you could be out in the balmy Glasgow weather.
I don't think I'd be leaving the flat tonight, to be quite honest.
Fair enough. I'm really excited to talk to you because, well, first of all, I've actually met you this summer when we were there, and I also am a longtime fan of Kilchoman, and I've been eager to talk to someone from Kilchoman for a while. So this is really exciting.
I know. It's nice to speak to you again. Nice to be on the podcast. Very glad that you asked me. Something a wee bit different.
Well, so speaking of different, I believe when we met, you were our guide for the day and our hand holder for the day, as it were. But I believe that was the very end of your tenure in that job, right? And you have can you tell us a little bit about your new gig and how it's going?
Oh my God, I love it. I absolutely love it. So for anyone that doesn't know, I worked in the visitor centre for about 5 years. That's where I kind of got into whiskey, and I've only ever worked at Kilchoman, so no other distilleries, and I got offered a job as a brand ambassador at the start of the summer. So I worked the season at the distillery and then started this job officially in September. So basically since September, I've not stopped or left an airport. I've just been constantly traveling, but I've seen some such cool places, and places that I would never have seen if it wasn't for this job, but so grateful to have done, because it's just such a cool way to see the world, and I get to do what I love while I do it. So just couldn't ask for a better opportunity for me, to be quite honest. Just insane. Pinch myself every day.
That's great. Well, we have our first comment. Our friend James DeJulio says he's got the Senig in his glass.
Oh.
I am drinking this, which I bought while I was at Kilchoman this summer.
Yes, did. I convinced him, stole all his money for it.
I have to admit, I have a real soft spot for Calvados finished whiskeys.
Yeah.
And so I have some other Kilchomans that are US exclusives, but this is the only UK one I have.
Mm-hmm. I think Calvados works really well with Kilchoman. I've always said that. I always think Calvados works really nicely with peated whiskies in general, actually, but definitely with Kilchoman, I always think it tastes always tastes lovely. So definitely works.
Yeah, it's because I've had some, the funny thing is I haven't had very much Calvados on its own in my life. I've had maybe 3 or 4, but
no, either. But I've not had a lot of things that they mature a lot of whiskey in. I don't drink sherry. I don't drink cognac. I don't drink Calvados. I don't drink port. I don't drink, but all these things you find whiskies in. So I drink a lot of whiskey, but I don't drink a lot of the stuff that they're made in. Bourbon. I've probably tried more bourbons than any of the other things in my life, but still not enough to kind of know bourbon, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Here, Ness is saying happy to see you again after the Whiskey Live Paris, Schlancheva with the Kilchoman Cognac matured.
Oh, nice to see you again too.
Good choice. Yeah, one of the things that I like about the Calvados finished whiskeys, especially like you said, the peated ones, is it's just a hint of it. It doesn't need a lot to sing its song. It gets its opinion across.
I think it's got it's deep, it's rich. It's it still packs a punch. It doesn't leave it flat, but it's not, like you say, it doesn't overwhelm. It's not overpowering. Still really drinkable. It's probably dangerously drinkable, actually.
Yeah, and because I think that sometimes it would be easy to overdo it. But it's not. It's really lovely. a little bit later while we're talking, I'm going to get to something I'm very excited about. another Kilchoman that I have sitting here.
Only the best. Only the best.
It's funny because one of the things that is when we were, excuse me, when we were making our film, we had a crew come by. We really wanted to film at Kilchoman because it was just a small crew at that point. It was just me and the cinematographer. And unfortunately, we didn't get to film there because the distillery was massive. It was under a massive expansion at the time.
Oh, right, yeah.
It was a big work site, and we shot some footage there and stuff, but it just was, we would have been in the way, frankly.
I don't know if the footage would have been very nice with all the construction workers, to be honest.
Right. But it's funny because I feel like Kilchoman's really this isn't based on science. This is just based on a feeling I have. Like, I feel like it's even more right now coming into its own. Like, I'm hearing other people talk about it more. It's just, I see it more often. I hear about it more often. I know you guys just released your oldest whiskey ever.
Yeah. So so in the time frame of when I started working there to now, that's kind of when it's like, when I first started, it was still very quiet. It was really small. Majority of people that walked in the door were either looking for the beach or and accidentally stumbled across it. They were just in to use the cafe, or they were wanting to know where all the horses went. And like that was kind of all it was. Whereas then it kind of got to like 2020, 2021, I feel. And that's when it kind of like went straight through the roof. Like it actually, like it just blew up. And then like now, especially with all the travel and stuff that I'm doing, I'm kind of realizing like, whoa, like, wait a minute, this is actually kind of a big deal. Not that I didn't think it was before, but I think now, because you're actually out in the public, you really do catch on to how much people talk about it and how much people love it. Like, I'm at all these shows and people are like, oh, Kilchoman, or they even like, they'll know me. They'll be like, oh, Emma. And I still feel like I had that disconnect being at the distillery that I was in. Like, obviously people visit the distillery, people would have seen like me on social media or the distillery on social media in general, but I always felt like it was, like a wee bubble on Islay. So you're kind of just like, it's just the distillery I work in. Whereas then you leave that and you go to these shows and you do these tastings and you're confronted with all these people that just absolutely adore it. And I just think that's something that was never the case, even as little as a year, 2 years ago. It's really just been in these last kind of couple of years that it has blown up, which is fantastic, which is so good.
I live in California, but I'm from Pennsylvania. And what I didn't realize until recently, and Kilchoman was kind of the way I realized this, is that we're really have an embarrassment of riches in California for whiskey selection, in part because so many of the importers are here.
Yeah.
And what I interviewed Holly Sidewan, who owns Whiskey Shop in New York, and she said whiskeys get stuck in California because if the distributors and the importers can sell it all here, why spend money shipping it around?
Yeah. And
Pennsylvania, which is half the distance to Scotland that I am right now, is the worst because it's also state-owned liquor stores. When I came back from Scotland this time, I brought my best friend in Pennsylvania a bottle of Kilchoman, which he'd never had or even seen before, and he absolutely loves it. And now he's really mad at the state stores because he can't get it there yet. So it's funny because you just hear more and more people talking about it, and
but I think it's still got this like buzz around it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's at the point still where its demand beats its supply. And people, like in the whiskey industry, people are always looking for the next best thing. People want something that they can impress their friends with, basically. So they love having something that's like, and obviously Islay in general has this massive name for whiskey. So it's like, as soon as you can show someone that you've got an Islay whiskey or even a distillery on Islay that they've not heard about, like, in the whiskey industry, people love having that. So I think that Kilchoman still has that kind of attraction of like, I've got something good that you've not tried sort of thing, which I think absolutely helps. That is good whiskey, so definitely helps. But I think the whole like buzz around the place and the fact that like we do it like independent, it's family run, growing our own barley and that sort of thing, people are like, oh my God, like that's so cool. I've not heard of that. Like people don't do that anymore. So yeah, it's there's so many little things that we've done at the distillery that just account towards its success.
Sure. and it's funny because there's so many new distilleries, and I realize Kilchoman's not new anymore, but there's all these new young ones. They're 5 years old, 4 years old. They have these sort of growing pains right now of figuring out what's the second. Someone recently said something to me that I thought was interesting, which is it's not about your first release. The fact that you're releasing a whiskey is buzz enough. It's about your second release. Are you going to be able to,
1,000%.
But now I feel like
momentum.
Sorry.
You've got to keep the momentum. Sorry.
Yeah.
You've got to keep that momentum. Like I speak about this quite a lot because obviously, as you said, like Kilchoman is new, but not the newest. And I think like you've got to have like a point of difference because like you say, like a first whiskey can sell well, or being a new distillery can sell you well because it's like we're new, but that can only take you so far, and then you need other things to like carry you through. Otherwise, you'll just fall flat in your face, which I think is going to be really difficult for a lot right now. You've got to really make sure your product can like hold up next to all the big guys.
Sure, and I think that like the only two that come to mind are Kilchoman and Aaron, about the same, not quite the same age, but like they're beyond their birthing pains, they're in, and now it's like you've decided who you are, you've decided what your profile is going to be, and now it's just a matter of sort of sanding it and getting it finer, and so I feel like every Kilchoman keeps elevating its own game, and same with Aaron, but we have a couple of questions coming in. So first of all, Helen Widowson says, "Evening all. Special hello to the lovely Emma."
Hello.
Yes. So here's the simpler question: is just wondering, is Emma an Elach, and how did she come to work at Kilchoman?
What gave it away? The accent, I assume. I go around. This is actually quite funny. I go like obviously traveling nowadays. I go like all around the world, and people always go to me, "Oh, what part of Ireland are you from?" And I'm like, Scotland. But I think it's because I don't have like a typical Islay accent that people just automatically assume that I'm not Scottish. But yeah, I'm from Islay, so I was born there, brought up there, lived there basically my whole life. Just very close to the distillery, actually. So I can, from my house on Islay, I can see Kilchoman from my house and my house from Kilchoman, which is, some people would say that's not nice to see your workplace from your home, but I quite liked it. And how did I come to work there? Is the most Islay story that you'd probably ever hear in your life. Basically, they were looking for staff, and the general manager of the distillery asked my dad if any of his daughters would want a job at Kilchoman working through the summer, so like seasonally. And my dad asked me, and I was like, "Aye, sure, why not?" So I started in the cafe, and then the rest was history. Almost 6 years later, we're still here, and I'm not in the cafe anymore.
Now you're out all over the world.
I know.
Well, the other question we have that's a little more involved, so I saved it for a second, was Mark Pruitt, who's the editor of Whiskey Network magazine, said, "I'm pretty excited about the Kilchoman has a 16-year expression coming. Can we learn more about that?" And I believe it's out, right? I haven't seen it in person yet. But
yeah, she's arrived. I don't know if it would have made its way as far as like far away countries. I think it'll take a wee bit longer. Like the lead time to even like America is like 2 months to like 8 weeks. So like it's going to take a bit longer, but it is officially released in like places, so Europe, the UK. The whiskey itself's obviously been a long time coming. To release a 16-year-old has been insane for us. I think it's a combination of bourbon and sherry casks. Well, I say a combination. It's 20 bourbon barrels and 1 sherry butt, which sounds really unusual. Everyone's always like, "Why is that?" Like, that's hardly anything. But the sherry was so rich, like so rich. You didn't need a lot to do a lot. I remember one day Robin's the head of production, and he took, I was in the warehouse with him one day, and he let me try a sample from the cask that they used to make the 16-year-old, and he took it out of the cask, and I looked at it and I was like, that's black. I genuinely thought it was like actual sherry. I didn't think it was whiskey. And I was like, "What is that?" And he was like, "That's the 16-year-old sherry butt that we're using to make the 16-year-old. I was like, Jesus. So 20 bourbon barrels, 1 sherry butt, and it's insane. It's so good, like so nice. I think it's kind of like it has mellowed over the years, as in how peaty it is, because obviously if you drink Kilchoman, you'll know that they're not made to be this kind of heavy, rich, oily flavour. So if we are maturing something for 16 years, it's kind of lost a bit of that. But it doesn't mean that it's any less Kilchoman or any less. You still get the peach, you still get the spirit influence, you get this lovely, rich flavour from the cask. It's just, I've never tasted anything for myself like it at all. It's so weird to be able to drink that and know that that's 16-year-old Kilchoman.
And that's the oldest release yet, right?
Yeah. So the distillery itself isn't even 18 yet. We'll turn 18 on the 14th of December of this year. So after that, so I was 17 just now, so 16 years. That's basically the whole entire distillery's life in casks. Which we basically now all bottled to make this one release, because we did not fill very many casks in like 2006, 2007. So we have really, really little. So I think that's why. And it'll be the only one of its kind for like years to come. Like other distilleries release 16-year-old whiskey for fun. They do it in their sleep. You can probably find a 16-year-old from the majority of distilleries in Scotland. Whereas for us, that's like everything we have in the bottle.
Is that because I know that when distilleries are first selling whiskey, there's a tendency, when there's a hype or an excitement about it, there's a tendency that they'll just sell it, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, we have to set aside some of this or we're not going to have any left.
Yeah. I mean, Kilchoman, obviously at the start, again, just a bit of background for anyone who doesn't know, we didn't make any gin, we didn't make any beer, we didn't make anything else. We made whiskey. So we had to wait 3 years and a day to even release that. So you're accounting for those 3 years where you have nothing. And then as a distillery releasing their whiskey in, 2009, we had to go to everything and convince people on Islay further afield to drink our 3-year-old whiskey when every other distillery on Islay has whiskey that is 20, 25, 50-year-old. Like, we're the youngest distillery on Islay by 124 years. So there is us and then there's no one. So we didn't have any of this like, oh, let's just hold back, let's just wait. Like, we were releasing 3-year-old whiskey and we had to. And then we had to release 4-year-old, we had to release 5-year-old. And the distillery is tiny, it's the smallest on Islay. In these early years, we made like 50,000 litres of spirit. So like we had nothing at all. So the majority of our early stock got bottled back then. We kept a little bit off it, but that little bit off it that we've kept is basically now all gone. It's in these bottles of 16-year-old. So I think that's obviously why, like, kind of it's held on the pedestal that it is, because I think looking at that on a shelf, if you knew nothing about Kilchoman, you'd be like, 16-year-old, like, all right. But I think for us, that's like, it's insane.
Sure. You know, it's funny, when we were shooting the film. I don't know if you've actually seen our film or not, but
yes,
in any case, okay. So the scenes you see at the very end of the film are Jim McEwen sitting on the cliffs.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the first things we shot. And the day we were driving out there, he had me ride with him, and then we drove past Kilchoman on the way to filming that stuff. And when we passed Kilchoman, he said something to me that always stuck with me. He said, you know, you really have to respect a distillery that is, you know, the smallest distillery on Islay, that is literally, the day it opens, its competition is going to be these gigantic luminary brands. And not just that, the multinational companies that own them now, you know. And he said they really kind of, you know, were David and Goliath kind of story. And I just, that always stuck with me.
Like, I talk about this a lot, obviously, like being the brand ambassador, and it's like sometimes when I'm explaining it myself, like I pinch myself, like talking about it, because I'm like, this doesn't, like, it's actually insane when you think about it, like the fact that we just kind of done it, and like it was successful, because I think it was a massive risk to take. And I think people on Islay thought that Anthony was insane. He thought like it was like, this is going to fall flat on its face. All these other distilleries are just reopening basically, and they're getting reopened by big companies and these big like industry giants that have bought them. I think obviously Bruichladdich was the exception at the time, but it was people with years and years of experience that were doing it. And like we had, like obviously Bruichladdich existed and they reopened it, whereas Kilchoman never existed. We just opened it. And like I think so many people have their doubts, and even back when we first started releasing like the young whiskies, I think everyone was really apprehensive about it. Whereas I think now, like we went through stages of winning like like best Islay single malt, best Islay peated whiskey, best Islay, like all this sort of thing with like a bunch of our expressions. And I think that's such like an insane thing to even be considered, but then an even more insane thing to win, because you think not that I don't think we compare to the other distilleries. I think we all are equal. We just all have different traits that make us unique. But I think it's more to do with the fact that like where we came from to where we are now, and to be held upon the same level as them within the industry is just, yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely. And and it's now it's become, you know, it's people talk about like you know, I'm not talking badly about them. I'm just saying Port Ellen reopening. Well, that's Diageo doing it. So there's like, they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay the bills next month. They don't have to worry about payroll and, you know, the electric bill.
They are fine.
It's you know, but it's a bunch of different challenge. Well, so Mark Pruitt followed that up. He said he'd like to get some samples of the 16 for the Whiskey Network.
Oh,
very, very crafty, Mark.
See what we can do.
So our James DiGiulio had an interesting question, which when I was with you in June, I learned this, and somehow James already knows it, but he keeps his ear to the grindstone on this stuff, or ear to the ground. Kilchoman is changing all their bourbon barrels to Breckenridge. What effect will that have on the core range?
Yeah. So no immediate effect. Like I'm talking like the next kind of 3, 4, 5 years. So we only changed supplier in January. So we used to use Buffalo Trace bourbon barrels. Buffalo Trace basically have enough people to give it to within their own kind of brand, their own company, that they no longer need to supply third parties. So they just kind of were like, right, you kind of can't get them anymore. So we looked for ages trying to find like a separate supplier, and you don't really get your pick, if you know what I mean, because you soon realise that lots of bourbon distilleries you go to don't sell to third parties. So we looked out with Kentucky and found Breckenridge, which we were actually really happy with, because they actually are very nice casks. It's very good bourbon, and they're also quite a small business. So I think it follows the ethos that Kilchoman does, like small, independent, like they owned, that sort of thing. I think in terms of flavour, we're expecting a slight change. I mean, at the end of the day, bourbon barrels are bourbon barrels. That you're going to get the same, like that kind of like vanilla sweetness, very light, like floral, fruity flavors. But we are anticipating a bit more spiciness from the whiskey than what it has at the moment. Like for the bourbon cheers, so things like McHarrie, obviously any like limited releases we do 100% Islay as well, because that's mainly bourbon, and that's because Breckenridge, I'm probably going to get this the wrong way around, but Breckenridge is made with a higher percentage of malt, like malted barley, than it is rye. So the rye obviously gives it a bit more of like the sweetness, or vice versa. I can't think which way around it is.
I would imagine I'd imagine with more malt, it would be sweeter, because the rye would be the sort of spicier note.
Okay, I then flipped around. Yeah, I know I know more spicy, so it must be more higher proportion of rye than malt.
Well, yeah. You know, it's funny, when we were filming at Balvenie, and while we were filming, we spent the day with Kelsey McKechnie and David Stewart, and while we were there, the tour groups would come by from time to time, and they would always chat with them, and it was very nice. And someone asked David Stewart that about people put a lot of time and energy talking about what supplier their sherry casks come from, but everyone just says ex-bourbon and they don't say it. And this isn't just coming from some random person. This is from David Stewart, who at that time was in his 52nd year as a master blender. He said to them, what we find is that the impact that bourbon has on the wood and the wood has on the bourbon is a bit more cross-platform, as opposed to the sherry is very different from one type of sherry to another. And he said, I'm not saying that, I'm paraphrasing him, this was 4 years ago, but he said, I'm not saying there's no difference. I'm just saying that the differences don't manifest the way they do between like an Oloroso and a Pedro Jimenez.
Yeah. You can change bourbon supplier. Like at Kilchoman, when we first started, we didn't use Buffalo Trace bourbon barrels. So there was a bit more inconsistencies. We basically got them from anywhere we could. So like there's been casks, we got them second hand, we sourced them from cooperages, we got them like just various different places. And I think until we kind of started sourcing them all from Buffalo Trace. So I think, like as you say, you don't worry as much about the inconsistencies with bourbon. I think it is a bit more, we've always said that they're easier to work with in general. Obviously, you do want a consistent flow of casks, but that's just more for your traceability and also to form a good relationship. You want to be able to kind of have that, like, whereas you can't do that through you can source a good relationship with a cooper, but you're not knowing where you're getting them from and all kind of the work that goes into getting them and the actual bourbon that's used to make them. Whereas I think Kilchoman, it's always been quite important to have, like, this is our sherry matured whiskey and here's a bottle of the, like, sherry that they make, and this is our cognac matured whiskey and here's the bottle of the cognac that they make. This is our Calvados, this is a bottle of, like, do you see where I'm going? So I think it's quite, for us, it was always quite important to have that, like, line of where it's came from, what it's made, what it's making.
Sure. Yeah. Do you know what I've always wanted to do, and I don't have the discipline to do it? And I know Paul Barrett, who's watching this today, because he was with me when we met you on Isla. And Paul, I know Paul's done this before because he does deeper dives than I do. But I will have tried plenty of whiskeys side by side with, say, different Kilchomans or, different Islas or different similar age statements. But what I've never done is this Calvados finished Kilchoman and then a glass of Calvados next to each other, or like a glass of sherry. And I've never done that, or the bourbon, like to dry Breckenridge next to a Breckenridge finished Scotch, or
We talked about doing this at one point, and this was when I was still in the visitor centre, because we were trying to, like, introduce new events or, like, tours or tastings, just trying to do something different, because, like, at every distillery you can do a tour, at every distillery you can do a warehouse tasting. So it was like, right, what can we do that's kind of a bit, like, niche? And that was one of the things that we suggested, but it was so difficult trying to get, like, stock from each, which I know sounds really silly because you think it should be relatively easy, but you could get little samples, but not enough to be like, right, we're going to run this as a tour sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So the logistics of it just became too difficult. So we were just, it's fine. And because our whiskies change all the time as well, it's not like we could do, like, we could get 4. So, like, you could get a bourbon, a sherry, a PX and a port. You would have to, like, ours would constantly change. So it just made it too difficult. But I've always said that would be such a good idea. And I've never really seen a distillery do it, but, like, I completely agree. Like, Anthony done it with us one day in the visitor centre, where he sat us down and gave us samples of all this stuff. So, like, this is white port, this is tawny port, that's ruby port, this is cognac, this is Calvados, this is PX sherry, this is, like, Manzanilla sherry, like, and he done it with all of them, like, all the kind of casks that we use. And I was like, this is so, like, interesting what they actually all taste like. And I just, like, and I was so surprised by the things that I liked compared to the whiskey matured in those casks that I thought I liked, if you know what I mean. So, like, I would assume that I would like certain other drinks because of how much I like it matured in that whiskey, or using to mature that whiskey, whereas some of them I wouldn't have said were my favourite. It was really weird, really unusual, the kind of impact that it has just in the cask while it matures.
So Paul, as I thought, commented, said, always recommended trying the whiskey and the inspiration side by side. Yeah. It's it's not that I don't want to do it. It's just that I don't own any Amontillado. So
I also don't really have the experience to know what's good. Like, I wouldn't even know where to start when I'm looking at these sort of things. Like, ask me to buy a bottle of nice sherry and I would be like, I don't know any brands. I don't know, like, any, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I know a lot about whiskey, but that's it. I'm very one-dimensional, very 2D.
Yeah. So Rick Johnson has another question. As Kilchoman increases the number of product it releases, will it be necessary to increase the size of your malting floor? I visited a distillery in 2021. Seems smaller to me than other distilleries that do their own floor maltings.
Yeah, so it's probably one of, if not the smallest one in Scotland. It holds 4 tons of barley at capacity, and it very rarely sits with 4 tons on it. So it's absolutely tiny. I think the only saving grace of it is the fact, well, up until now, has been the fact that we only ever malted our own barley that we grew ourselves, which is roughly maximum 30-40% of our annual production, made with our own barley that we malt ourselves. Now, with us sourcing barley from, so we used to get the other kind of 60-70% from the Maltons in Portellin. Obviously, they don't give barley to us anymore. Again, kind of similar issues. Buffalo Trace just don't have capacity, increasing their own Diageo distilleries, so just can't give to us anymore, which at the end of the day is fine, because like we can source from somewhere else, it's like no issue at all. But we have to get it from the mainland now, which obviously is a bit more of an issue to worry about, like logistics of the ferries and all the other things that you've got to stress about running a business on an island. So we are looking at expanding the malt floor now, and we're going to put in like a commercial maltings. So it's not going to be a malting floor. It's going to be like a Saladin box, or that's what we're looking at. I don't know if that's what we've kind of definitely decided on, but that's what we're kind of like looking at, being the most like close to traditional as possible. So basically it would be a floor, same as the one that you would have seen when you visited. And instead of turning it by hand, it would be machine turned. So you would turn it around, it kind of be big levers, big rollers that would like spin across the floor, and that would turn it. Just so it needs less kind of manpower. And that means that we could buy barley in, unmalted, malt it ourselves. So that, again, it just means that more of it is done on Islay, which would be lovely for us, because that's obviously the whole like philosophy of the distillery. We were hoping to have that done next year. I don't know if the plans are still the exact same. We were cutting back on some of the expansion, just because, again, right now it's hard to get things on and off Islay. You don't want to start building something and then not have it finished. So we were planning on expanding a lot at once, whereas now I think we're just going to do like one wee thing at a time. So right now we're focusing on building some more additional warehousing. That's really what we're at the moment. But yes, a malt floor potentially is coming.
That's cool. That's great to know. And I don't know if this is accurate or not, but James DiGiulio said malt floors for the 100% barley or 100% Islay. Is that?
Yeah. So we, at the moment, we don't malt any barley other than our own. So we grow all of our own barley for roughly 30 to 40% of production, and that makes any bottle of Kilchoman that you see that says 100% Islay on the front of it. So there's one release that we have consistent in our core range, and it comes out annually. So there's like the 1st to the 13th edition of it at the moment, and then other smaller limited releases that you might see like more infrequently dotted all around the world. So roughly 30 to 40% of annual production, and that's, we only malt our own barley, whereas that's potentially what could change if we put in our own malt floor, our own commercial malt floor, because we'd be able to get more barley. Obviously, we're never going to be able to grow any more of our own, but we could buy in barley that's been growing, and we could malt it ourselves, which would be, fantastic. Really nice to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of 100% Islay, now I get around to it.
Segue.
Yes, I am going to open this while we're chatting. And as I told Emma before we went live, this is my favorite whiskey that I had last year. And this is from 2 years ago, but this is my favorite whiskey, the 11th edition of the 100% Islay. I fell in love with this whiskey, and I've sourced as many bottles as I can, which is hard when it's a 2-year-old release, when it's an annual release, and now I'm 2 behind. Because every time I call a store, they'd say, well, we have the 12, we have the 13. It's like, no, I have that, but I want this one.
Yeah.
So so this is my third bottle of this, and I'm opening it here.
I absolutely love it. I remember we done, so the 1st to the 10th edition basically were all only matured in bourbon, and Anthony said that that's always how he wanted 100% Islay to be, was solely in bourbon barrels. And then this was the first year that we put sherry in it, was the 11th edition, and oh my god, I absolutely fell in love with it. It's probably one of my favorite Kilchomans, is that exact bottle.
I don't know what it is about this whiskey. I mean, what you're saying is what it is about this whiskey, but it just is for me, it's just the perfect balance of everything I'm looking for.
Yeah, because even when we came out with the 12th edition the year after, which was like lovely, still an excellent whiskey, but I was literally just like hung up on the 11th edition. I just thought it was so good. And then the 13th edition, which is what came out in September there, we didn't add any sherry again, so it went back to being solely bourbon barrels, which again, lovely, but I just loved that like bourbon sherry mix. I just thought it was like just chef's kiss.
As soon as I haven't tasted it yet, but I've just, because it's been a few months since my last bottle mysteriously emptied.
Once you've done
but it's just, this whiskey just speaks to me on some magic level. And I saw that Helen said, I think our favorite has to be the Madeira Sublime whiskey.
Oh, so you're just naming all my favorites. I think to round off, I think it's 100% Isla, Madeira, the port cask, the Amburach, and then either the PX or the 16-year-old. I don't know which one.
The other, I have a U.S. exclusive Madeira cask. I don't have it right with me. It's in my liquor cabinet. But I've never had a whiskey in my life that changes more with a couple drops of water than that whiskey does. The first time I was sitting outside with my business partner Trevor, and we were drinking it, and I drank one neat, and then I was going to have a second one, and I put a couple of drops of water in, and then I thought I'd picked up the wrong whiskey because it just, a couple drops of water just blossomed. I mean, it was, and I liked it before, but it just was amazing. The few drops of water it had, the influence it had.
That's so, was it a Madeira finish or like a full like Madeira single cask?
No, it was a Madeira finish.
Madeira. But Madeira, this is what I was saying. Madeira is one of these things. I love that whiskey. I absolutely adore that whiskey. I want to be buried in a grave cuddling a bottle of that whiskey. But I tried the actual Madeira when we done that tasting with Anthony, and I was like, oh, don't like that. Not a fan. So I just found that really weird because I literally thought I was going to fall in love with the Madeira that we used, and I just didn't like it as much as I liked the whiskey. So I just thought it's so weird about how like the interaction of that happens, because I mean, not that the Madeira was bad, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. Whereas the Madeira matured whiskey, I adore it. So very odd.
I'm drinking this now. I'm reminded there's something in the blend of this that where the peat sits on top of the sherry notes, and in a way that is just magical to me, because I think sometimes sherried whiskeys, especially heavily sherried whiskeys, I have to really be in the mood for them. You know, that I could sometimes find them a bit overwhelming, and I never don't like them, but sometimes they're just too much. But this is just this kind of it's like riding a wave, and it's, you know, it just really, I'm sad because now that I've opened this, the clock has begun ticking on it. and I shan't see it again. But you mentioned another one that I want to bring up too, the Amburach, because I had never had it until about 2 or 3 weeks ago. The editor of our film, I was at his house and I mentioned it, and he said, "Oh, I have some," and he gave me a dram of it, and it was fantastic. And I'd always heard it was, but
so good. It's the weirdest. Like, we'll never be able to recreate that, and it's probably one of these ones that when I talk to people, it's like a fan favorite. Like, people bang on about the Amburach so much. It's probably one I hear. That and 100% Island Lochgorm are probably like the three that I just hear all the time. And obviously 100% Island Lochgorm we do all the time. But Amburach, we will never hear of again. It's like the weirdest mix of, so like, to explain basically like what it is, or what happened basically. So at the distillery, when obviously you're mixing together the casks, we have 2 vatting tanks. So to make a whiskey, you have to marry together all the casks. In one vatting tank, there was a vatting of McHarrie, so that's a marriage of bourbon and sherry casks. In the other vatting tank, there was a port matured, 5-year-old fully matured port whiskey. There's levers all over the vatting tanks that you can use to empty them, fill them, add water, do whatever. One of the guys in production, instead of emptying a tank, he equalised them. So he tipped the port into the McHarrie. So we now have a vatting of bourbon, sherry, and port. Obviously, that's no longer McHarrie. Can't call it that. He went to Anthony with his tail between his legs. I think Anthony went psycho for a minute. And then obviously thought, well, we can't waste all this whiskey. Like, I'm not chucking it away. He didn't like the flavour at that point. So he was like, well, I'm not releasing it just now. So we put it back into bourbon barrels to kind of mellow it out for 2 years, I think it was. 2 or 3 years. And then he finished it off in quarter ruby port casks. And then released it as Amburach. So it's like it's a marriage of 3 casks that's been doubly finished, basically, is what it is. he literally came into the office and he wanted to know, because it's called amburach, because amburach is the Gaelic word for a mess, basically. That's what it means. Anthony came into the office one day and he was asking what's Gaelic for fuck up. And we were like, Anthony, you can't call it that. But I think it was the best mistake that someone at the distillery's ever made. It turned out phenomenally. And I think it's just such a prime example of just how you just everything, like for us, just every drop of liquid is vital. Like we were not wasting that. That was getting fixed. And it got fixed and became one of our most like renowned whiskies, basically.
You know, before we shot our film, I got to work at the Glasgow distillery for a week.
Oh,
I followed a mash from literally the truck arriving with it all through the final day I filled casks. Talking about, you know, levers, you know, with pipes and things. I was so nervous the entire first 2 days I was there. They said, you know, go throw that one here to this from 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock.
Yeah,
said, this one. And I was annoying. Like I was like, this one here, this way. And I think making it worse was that one of the stillmen had just, or one of the mashmen had just done something. He had screwed something up, nowhere near on the level of what you're talking about, but he had hit the second water. He basically had filled it with cold water.
Oh.
And so then they managed, the head distiller managed to save the mash. He hit it with hot water, but then he slowly built the temperature up and they managed to save most of it. But there was like, when I arrived there was like a panic going on because, and so that just made me that much more scared. It's like, I just, so I totally relate.
During like the winter and stuff like that at the distillery, and they send us to production a lot. So I've done every area of the process. So they've sent malt floor, with stillhouse, warehouse, bottling. They love sending us to bottling. But I was the same when we went. They took us into the stillhouse, and obviously we do it all by hand in there. So lots of levers, lots of valves, and a lot of the stillmen are quite good, and they'll kind of like take you and show you and point it out. Whereas a lot of them are like, you'll learn it better just doing it, and they'll literally just same thing, point and just be like, turn that. There's so many there. I'm like, which one? They're like the blue one. I'm like, there's 6 blue ones. What blue?
Griffin Wright has a question for us. Have we discussed the gloriousness that is it's Comrie, right?
Comrie, yeah.
Comrie. So wonderful. I need to find them all now. I've had one at Delilah's.
Batch 3, which is the bourbon sherry 100% Isla batch. I love that one. Batch 5, which is the port, I think are my favourites. So batch 3, batch 5. Because batch 1's bourbon and sherry, batch 2's just bourbon, batch 3's bourbon and sherry 100% Isla, batch 4's just bourbon, and then 5's port, and 6 is a Calvados finish, I'm sure.
Do you have to memorize these for your job? Like, that's amazing that you just fired that.
Name any whiskey, I'll give you cask, match. No, I'm joking. No, I remember them. They kind of come off the top of my head from being in the visitor centre. People would ask about them loads, so I'd just go.
I'm almost embarrassed to drink this whiskey online because I'm afraid of my facial expressions because I just love this so much.
Oh, I'm actually so jealous. I wish I could like reach through the screen and grab it out your hand. I'm as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna look. I might ruin it by telling people, but this bottle that I couldn't find anywhere. I found it at Potomac Wines in Washington D.C., which will ship. So one of my business partners and I ordered 2 bottles from them, and each got one. So we still have some. I see, like, every single time I see a bottle of 100% Isle on a shelf somewhere, I like look to see what edition it is, because obviously the labels are all the same, but it just says like 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, like whatever edition it is. And every single time I see one, I just get my hopes up that it's the 11th.
Yeah, and it never is.
Never is. Just have to sweet talk Anthony into giving me a bottle. Don't know why he would, but I just have to ask.
So, what's next? First of all, what's next for you, and what's next for Kilchoman? I mean, are you, I assume, off on more trips very soon?
Yeah. So, what do I have? What I know of in the next kind of while. So, December, I'm done. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving the country for the rest of this year. In January, I'm going to Canada and then America. So I'm going to the Victoria Whisky Festival in Canada, and then I'm going to Seattle and Portland in America. After that, I'm going to a whisky show in Finland, and then Hungary, and then Sweden, and then I have a bit of a break, and then Vienna.
Wow.
And that's all I know of so far. There is talks of us repeating the European tour. So if any of you kind of followed along the social media of that, we travelled around Europe last spring and went to lots of different shops, tastings and things. So we're doing it again next year. We're hoping to do it again next year and do it kind of bigger and larger and more countries, more places. Basically, if you live in Europe, we'll be visiting.
Well, Paul would like to know when you're coming to Chicago, and he's saying LA just for my sake. But
I hope so. Well, as soon as they mentioned America, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. But I'm unfortunately not that I know of Chicago or LA yet. But America's a very big market. I'd imagine this will not be the only time that I'll go. And I'm only going to kind of North America because it's obviously very close to like Canada, so I can get it's easy to get to from where I'm going to be. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to be back very soon. I'd love to go and see more of the country. I'd absolutely love to kind of see it. And like you were saying, like obviously like California as well, that's where the whiskey comes into. So like that's where it's distributed, so imported into California from Scotland for us anyway. So I'm definitely would guess I would be in California at some point to kind of see where all the big stores and like lots of Kilchoman is and all the bars and stuff. So LA maybe more likely than Chicago, but we'll see.
Well, it's I just learned this when I was at Victoria last year. Matt Hoffman from Westland Distillery was there, and he said Victoria is slightly south of Seattle. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But he's right, because it sticks off the end of Canada a bit, you know?
Yeah, that's true, actually. Because the border goes like along and then it goes kind of like up. And like, so you're kind of, if it was to go in a straight line between the US and Canada, technically Victoria's in the US, but it's not. Yeah, that's true, actually.
Yeah, it like hangs off the side.
Yeah.
Someone just sent me a link, by the way. The 11th edition Kilchoman is still available at Potomac Wines.
How much to ship a bottle to Scotland? He can have all my money.
That's insane. And I know what I'm going to be doing later this afternoon. I have. Although the person who sent it to me is probably buying it, as he'll find out how many there are and buy them all, just to spite me. But the whiskey, the Victoria Whiskey Festival. You know, I'm trying to remember when I was there earlier this year. I don't remember Kilchoman being there.
I don't think anyone went last year, because I'm sure when I was talking to like James and that about going, I'm sure he said it's been 2 years since someone's went. I think because I'm sure he says, oh, we want to send someone this year, because I don't think anyone went last year. I might be wrong. They talked to me about a lot of trips, but I don't think we were there last year. So I'm looking forward to being back. I hear it's quite like a good sort of setup. So like it's like lots of master classes, and then there's kind of a section where it's just that you can go and drink all the whiskey. So you can like pay for the master classes individually. You can do a few. I think that's quite nice, because then it keeps the master classes separate to the actual show. Whereas most of the shows that I do, it's kind of the master classes are within the shows, and you have to kind of leave your stand to go and do the master class.
Yeah. It was strange, because I was just kind of observing it for the first time myself, and it was all little small room master classes, 20, 30 people. And then the big thing at the end of the day, which was the cattle call. And
that's what you want to call it.
Well, it was, as I said to you, it built to this full sort of frenzy. But It was good. It was really good, and I think you'll have a great time. But so what's next for Kilchoman? I mean, do you have any
like
releases that are coming?
Yes. So next year's releases, we've got obviously your usual Lochgorm, 100% Isla. In the spring, we're going to be releasing a fully matured Sauternes whiskey. In October, we're going to, or kind of autumn, we're going to be releasing a white port matured whiskey.
Wow.
So that's exciting. And then we're looking into adding a cask strength, I think it's the wrong word, but we're looking at releasing a higher ABV percent whiskey into our core range. So we'll have 5 core range whiskies. And we're looking at putting it at a higher alcohol percentage, and it'll be so same thing, kind of batch release. So like your Lochgorm and 100% Isla, this one will just have one replacing the other, and it'll be at a higher percent. So we're looking at kind of like a batch strength sort of thing, like 50, 55, 56%, and then with a variation of like casks for every edition. So the same kind of way that you get with like Lochgorm, where it kind of changes age, always sherry but changes age. 100% Isla, always our own barley but changes casks. This one will be same percent but changes casks. So that'd be quite cool. So people have been kind of begging for a cask strength or higher strength Kilchoman, more like consistent or more released, and I think that's going to be quite a good addition to the core range. We're trying to come up with a name now. I was on a call this morning and like no one can really think of a name for it. I think we want something that fits with the core range. So obviously like they're all kind of place names and they've got the 100% Isla, but that makes sense for what it is. And we're just struggling to call it something. So if anyone's got any suggestions, then please send them to me because I'm not very imaginative.
I think you should call it Griffin Wright. I'm kidding. He's one of the people he was on the tour with us this summer. And, but Griffin does have a question. He asked, I'm not going to put it on screen because I can't find it. Our chat's been going through it so far, but he wanted to know is he said, I would love to see Kilchoman release new make at the distillery, or I don't know that you would ever bottle it, but I've never tasted Kilchoman new make.
Have you not?
No, I don't think so.
So it's so nice. It's so nice. And I'm not just saying that because I work there, but it's definitely one of the nicest new makes that I've tried. Like, absolutely. It's so... I think people often look at new make and think it's not going to taste of anything, because this is where the whole, like, idea comes from, that the only flavour you get is from the casks and all that sort of thing. But obviously, Kilchoman doing what it does, we needed to have, like, good quality new make spirit so we can make good whiskies at a young age. So our new make has always been just outstandingly good. It's got so much flavour, so much body, so much depth. Obviously, that comes from the fact that it's a really long fermentation, size and shape of our stills, all that jazz. We used to bottle it. We did used to release it like right in the early days, but there kind of came a point where it's like, for one, we needed to keep it to make the whiskey because we, like I explained earlier, don't have very much. But then also people were focusing now on we wanted them to turn their attention to the whiskey rather than just want to buy new make spirit. We usually, or we sometimes give it out on the tours. So if you visit the distillery and you ask the girls in the visitor centre very nicely, tell them that Emma said you can try it, then they'll let you try some. But we give it out to folk all the time just because I'm so like an advocate for the fact that you need to try this, because people need to stop thinking that it's only the casks that can make something taste good. Like, you can get so much flavour into it before that. Otherwise, what would be the point in taking folk around in the tour and explaining all this stuff and the impact and everything it has if it was just the casks, if you know what I mean? So I think we're quite big at Kilchoman on the fact of like, this is how this process works, but this is also how it gives it flavour.
Well, it seems to me that all of the distilleries that the late Jim Swan worked with have great new make. And that seemed to be sort of, front and center in there. And I know he worked with Kilchoman as well. Yeah. And they're all that way. There's obviously one of the bits of wisdom he imparted on people was to take that seriously and really
Oh, he really did. He really did. He was very much like a science man more than like just a whiskey man, if that made sense. Like he knew how to like talk about um like whiskey through the eyes of like individual processes. So like Anthony basically gave him like a vision, like, right, I'm making young whiskey. How am I going to do this well? And Jim was basically like this. And I think it's down to him, the fact that we owe so much of our success to people like that. Without him, I don't think Kilchoman would be what it is.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of every distillery that I've tried that he worked with.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I realize this is oversimplifying it, but one of the challenges for new distilleries is selling whiskey they have to sell it at a pretty young age at the beginning. So you can't let the wood have to, it can't make or break on the wood, because you're going to have to wait too long for that. And
yeah, because like at the end of the day, like you could make, like, hypothetically, like I don't think any distillery is doing this, but hypothetically, you could make awful new make spirit, doesn't taste that nice, and then put it in a cask for long enough, and all of a sudden it's something that's quite nice, because that's how it works. Essentially, that's how they were doing it when they were making whiskey way back when, and they realised, oh, wait a minute, that's quite good, but it didn't turn quite good until they'd left it in there for long enough. And then people were like, oh, as it's getting older, it's getting nicer. But it wasn't necessarily that it was getting nicer, it's just that all the harshness that you had made during the production of the spirit was getting removed. It was just removing all the harsh flavours. Whereas if you didn't have any of that harshness to start with, from the new make, you didn't have anything to remove in the casks. So the casks were just imparting flavour. And you didn't need to have any like subtraction. It was just lots and lots of like addition of flavour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I never thought about it in those terms. That's perfect. So Russell Patton said he just bought a bottle. Russell's in Scotland, so he's not buying it from where I'd be buying it. Russell's in Scotland, God. So I don't know where he found it. Maybe
where?
Now that he already bought it, maybe he'll share where. I don't know.
I want the name of the shop.
He could put a link in the chat if he wants.
Give me the address.
Yeah, it's a lot. Look, I don't make it a regular practice to recommend whiskeys to people. I'm much more interested in what they have to say about what they like and stuff, and I'm happy to have a conversation. But this is the one whiskey I always tell people that, it's incredible. He says he's not sharing.
I just read that. I'm really offended, Russell. You hurt my feelings.
Well, I can tell everyone where Russell lives, and you can show up at his house.
I will actually. I might be. You might think I don't look scary, but I can be, especially when it comes to this whiskey, Russell.
But Russell's a competitive cyclist, so he could get away in a hurry. But he said, I saw him say earlier, it's too icy to ride a bike in Scotland right now. So.
See, I've got you.
Well, this hour has absolutely flown past, as it often does for me. When I really, the reason I do this all the time is because I really love talking about whiskey, and I learn as much as I do. But I want to be sensitive to the fact that you're spending your Friday night with us. So, you can go outside and play in the snow.
This is my first quiet Friday night in weeks, because I've been doing so much traveling. Usually at this exact moment, I'm stood behind a stand at a whiskey show. So this is actually a nice, quieter pace. I can hear my own thoughts.
Helen said, we've seen you be scary, especially when speaking to Colin.
And we miss Colin.
Yeah. Well, look, here you go. We've scared Russell into spilling the beans. I don't know that place. I assume it's.
Yeah, I do. Well, I've heard it. I don't know whereabouts it is. I will drive however many miles it takes. I don't care if it's in Orkney. I'm going there. I'm going to take a photo.
If Russell's going there in person, it's going to be somewhere on the East Coast.
Okay, we could do that.
But in any case,
I don't know whereabouts it is, though.
I hope everybody is. I hope the people at Villeneuve Wines are about to wonder what the heck happened to their website, because they're about to sell out of a whiskey. Well, anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. I really appreciate the great chat, and not only your great insights, but the great stuff in a lot of great questions. And
definitely. So do I.
it's a big honor for me because I'm a huge fan of Kilchoman and I'm a big fan of yours. So it was fun talking to you.
Thank you very much. I know this was nice. It was nice to speak to you again. Very, very glad for the invite. Very happy.
You too. And wait, what? Okay, so I'm just sharing comments. These farewell, but yes, I will. Hopefully, I'll get to see you when I'm back in Scotland in May.
Yeah. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Thank you very much.
Have a great Friday, everyone, and I'll see you next week where we can harass David Brody.
Tell him I said hi.
I will do. Thanks. Cheers, everyone. Thanks.